to introduce the panelists and help guide what is likely to be a really important, detailed, empirical discussion of some of the use cases for national identification systems and some of the problems and issues. And we have here an array of people who are deeply steeped in aspects of this. And as you can tell from your program, and where the bios are extensive, we're dealing with people who've had many roles and many jobs prior to the current one, and I will not recount that. But what I'm going to do is introduce them all at once now, and then when each person has finished, I will have some sort of code or a couple of words to each if they start going over 15 minutes. So when each person is finished, he or she will go back to place and the next one will come up. And people are seated in the order in which they will be speaking. It's also a logical order. So what I will do after that is ask, and they already are aware that this is what they're thinking about, ask the panelists to ask each other a question or so, if there's one that occurs to them. They shouldn't make up a silly question, but if there are questions they have of each other, that will be an opportunity after the four have spoken, and then we'll open it up for remarks from and questions from the audience. So this panel is entitled The Uses of Local and National Identification Systems, Financial Inclusion, Benefits and Services, Health Insurance, and Development. And our four speakers, as I say, are widely experienced in aspects of this complex title. And our first speaker is Mariana Dahan, and she's the coordinator for the ID4T Identification for Development Working Group at the World Bank. And she has worked in the telecommunications field, has a PhD and from MIT Sloan School of Management, and has worked in a wide range of countries and in different systems and companies. And her plan now is to speak particularly about the World Bank ID4T and its overarching relevance to much of what we're talking about in this course, and also to speak to why the World Bank decided it was going to get involved in this complex topic to begin with. Our second speaker is Tolman Arabic here, who is a senior partner at the Omidyar Network, and he has a long history as a consultant leadership with McKinsey & Company and other major firms. He's worked in most continents in the world, and he began by working in the IMF and the U.S. Congressional Budget Office. He holds a PhD in economics and is going to be speaking about how financial inclusion can be supported and enabled through national identification systems. And in that context, he will also speak about land rights and land tenure, which I know has been a topic that's come up in the course of the preceding discussions, and it's a crucial one in this panel. Our third speaker is John DeStefano, who has been mayor of New Haven, Connecticut for many years, something along 20 or 21 years. And say?
Now it's long.
Long. And that involves running for office every 2 years. He's now a consultant and works with community development banks, and he can speak from that experience, but he also is really immersed in the ways in which he has used identification systems or other registries to make New Haven work as a community that is faithful to its mission to help with development and school reform and immigration initiatives. In particular, New Haven is a gateway city. In other words, it's a place where people go when they are first coming to the United States. And so that puts particular burdens on the social services and the ascertainment mechanisms of city governance. Nisha Agarwal is going to be speaking about similar issues from the standpoint of New York City, which is her home base, and she's a lawyer, public interest lawyer, and has been working in the justice and legal systems and with the mayor's office to be sure that this issue of inclusion and, well, identification, inclusion, and support of new immigrants in the city of New York is actually taking place in a respectful and appropriate manner. And She's had considerable experience as a practicing lawyer and in nonprofit groups, and I think both John and Nisha's presentations in the context of the European migration crisis will be important for us to understand in terms of what cities are capable of doing, and how information systems and identification systems can support dignified and productive outcomes for our new arrivals. So with that as background, it is my pleasure to turn the podium over to Mariana, and please step forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you very much, Jackie and Rose, for inviting me. These wonderful ladies, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm also grateful to Jennifer for asking me the question of why the question of identification is important to me. It is important to the World Bank, and it is important to the development community in general. So if you allow me, I'll start with a short personal story. I'm born in the poorest country in Europe, in one of the poor families in the country, and I didn't have running water, I didn't have access to toilets, to electricity, I didn't have much, entertainment when I was young. But my mother was very concerned that I didn't have a birth certificate. So she was living with my father's relatives, and they were like, what's the big deal? She watches the cows, she takes care of the pigs, why does she need a birth certificate? The reality is that, when I finally got a birth certificate, my mother rushed to enroll me in school. And I was one of the first girls to enroll in school so early in the village, and perhaps in the entire country. So that is a very short story, but just to tell you that this can touch each of us in ways that we may not imagine. I certainly did not imagine to come to Harvard today, so very, very pleased to be here. And as unique as is my story, there are, as a matter of fact, 625 million, it's an estimated number, 625 million children who today do not officially exist because their birth has never been registered. They physically exist, of course, we realize that, but they are in a sense invisible for the development policies. The policymakers cannot design programs that can target them. They may not be covered by immunizations plans, by education plans. So it is indeed a huge problem. That's why, as a matter of fact, the development community started to really look to find these missing millions. And that's how the topic of civil registration and identification became important to the development community. To your question, Jennifer. Today, we have a growing ecosystem of players in the development community, but also beyond it, that is putting an increased focus on identity. And a couple of months ago, identification became one of the Sustainable Development Goals as a target 16.9 in the SDGs agenda. It reads as provide legal identity, including birth registration to all by 2030. Which in itself is a quite comprehensive definition, although it conflates two different concepts of legal identity and of birth registration. However, it does provide us with, again, an estimate of people who lack today any form of recognized identity and ID documentation, and this is accounted to about 2.4 billion people, so about a third of the world's population today. We believe that this is a big development challenge for us to pay attention to, and I think venues like this one can provide us with some answers to how to address this issue. We think that this is also aligned with the World Bank's twin goal, which is one ending extreme poverty, and the other one is to promote shared prosperity. So robust identification systems indeed have the potential to, foster financial inclusion, better service delivery, etc. Some examples, again, from some estimates in the World Bank's Findex data, tell us that about 375 million people today lack access to a bank account because they don't have a form of recognized ID documentation, and that is based on their own evaluation of the situation. So they declared they are excluded from the financial world because they don't have an ID. There are other studies who have estimated that if everyone had an access to a bank account, would conduct online transactions, etc., would access the benefits they are entitled to using digital identification systems, then this would save governments about $50 billion yearly by 2020. So a few studies do exist. Again, these are estimates, and the field of research in this area is still nascent. So we try to find more evidence and to conduct more research and impact assessments to evaluate the situation. Some other examples of impact can be found in areas such as, cash transfers to pensioners, improved tax collection, insurance, health insurance for households, and payroll savings by eliminating ghost workers. These are all anecdotal evidence for now. We again look for more sustained evidence and would like to conduct more robust impact assessments so that we can substantiate more. But one example I'm particularly proud is the one of the Republic of Moldova. It's a country that didn't provide birth certificates to its children. It's actually the country where I'm born. And with help from the World Bank, the country managed to digitize its records and provide now mobile identity to its citizens, including a mobile signature. So it has been recognized as one of the most innovative countries in Europe, beyond being one of the poorest ones, due to a digital identity project that it has successfully led. So this is just one of the examples, but also leading to how did we at the World Bank look at all this experience to shape up our current agenda. We looked at the portfolio we had over the last 3 decades and discovered there were at least 140 projects that had an ID component in it, and most of the times this was a project that had functional ID component, meaning that sectoral applications in social protection, in health, in the governance sector were using different components of identification for their purposes. And these were projects that existed in over 70 countries in the world. Now, more than half of it are either closed or active, going towards being closed. There are a couple of them who are in the pipeline. But the point is that the bank decided to rationalize, in a sense, all these investments being made and work towards the integration of all these different perspectives and see how different sectoral approaches and projects that are using registries and ID-related components in their projects can be unified with a harmonized view of ID identification as a platform where, there is an optimization of resources being spent by governments to establish a platform where multiple sectors can plug in and not build any more parallel systems that do not interoperate, do not talk to each other. So basically this was the thinking behind. We've launched Identification for Development, ID4D, in short, in July 2014, and it involved several sectors at the World Bank, including social protection, governance, finance and markets, transport and ICT. We also embedded later on the gender dimension and data, development economics group. So really a broader platform also for key stakeholders at the bank to exchange views and to shape up this agenda. Going forward, we have established a standardized approach where we help countries assess their systems in place, and that this goes to the ID systems, to the registries, multiple registries that they have, and help them envision a design where they can work towards a platform approach. And then if the country requests the World Bank for support, then we would help them with the implementation as well. One example of technical assistance in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, the hardest hit by Ebola virus countries, was to assess their systems in place and see how we could have leveraged a digital identification project in these countries to deliver healthcare to the victims if we knew them. Right? If we knew that they've checked in at the hospital with that disease, how do we provide health workers with payments that are needed to care for the families of the affected and for the patients themselves? How do we rationalize the aid distribution? The countries have approached later on the World Bank for assistance, and that goes to the financial assistance. We couldn't immediately positively address this request, but we did notice, for example, in Sierra Leone, that UNDP is also undertaking a project there. So really the question of coordinated effort and a concerted action came to mind, and we think that in order to scale up ID4D, we should work towards more donor coordination and funding, leveraging different sources available. We should share the knowledge we gather through all these interventions and also build more expert connections. And I hope us being here today will help us toward getting the right experts on board at some point when we need to help our client countries. Thank you very much. If you have any other suggestions, idea on how you'd like to partner with the World Bank and move this agenda forward, I'll be happy to answer your questions. And I also have my colleagues from the World Bank here, so we're here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great introduction to this complex topic. Till.
Escape, close. Thank you very much for having me, Jennifer, Jackie, organizers. I missed yesterday, apologies for that, but the morning was already fascinating. I will speak about an industry user's perspective on EID, so not end user, but an industry user. The Omidyar Network, in case you are wondering, we are an impact investing firm. We support social entrepreneurs who come up with new ways of doing good things. That could be in the non-for-profit government space, public sector space. It could be in the for-profit private sector space. Typically, what we support is technology-led innovations because they tend to have lower cost at scale. And we do that in areas of civic engagement, education, property rights, Jennifer, as you mentioned, and access to finance, which is what I will largely speak about. Now I have to advance my computer because I have a few notes there and this one, so that's what you see. Yep. So I will, I will talk about the financial inclusion use case, and then I will somewhat gingerly suggest a few desirable features from my perspective, but I'm not a specialist. I would like to stress that up front. And as a matter of fact, I probably would have edited this already a little bit based on what I heard this morning. So I will do that as we go. And I will close by imagining a little bit the ultimate impact, because to us, identity and the things that we're talking about are only a means to an end. And that is the ultimate impact from a beneficiary's or user's perspective. So, starting point, half the world is excluded. If Gallup does a survey, only 40% of folks have 30 hours paid work a week globally, working age adults. So 60% of the world's working age adult population lives in the informal economy. You know the below $2 a day statistics. ILO would say that just about half of working age adults have any form of social protection. The type of social protection that we enjoy with pension, health insurance, these type of things. Robert can correct me, but it's about 20% of the world population enjoys that. And 40% of folks are excluded from formal financial services. These are obviously, it's not the same half, but there's a high degree of overlap. And I bet you that the number of people who do not have an identity and therefore cannot participate in the economy is highly correlated with these sets as well. So half of the world lives very, very, very differently from all of us. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not economically active. They are actually very economically active. They are active in the informal economy. And they have to be. This is a necessity, not a choice. So they hustle. They have a number of different income sources. They also have a number of informal financial arrangements. The rotating savings club, the money lender, the pawnbroker, all these type of things. Very active financial life. More active than our financial life. Because our life is much more predictable and stable, right? We get a paycheck on the 1st of the month, and then we pay the mortgage or the rent on the 5th of the month. Our cash flows are aligned. Poor people in the informal economy don't have that luxury. So they have very active financial informal lives, and these arrangements are very expensive and very unreliable. It is expensive to be poor. And that is one of the things that we are quite upset about and that we want to help change. So technology is really our best hope to reach far more people, include far more people at a far lower cost in the modern formal economy. And in particular, the mobile phone holds the key to that future. The colleagues from the GSMA are here, so I will not quote the exact numbers, but there is, 7 billion handsets out there? There are more people with mobile phones than access to water toilets or toothbrush, and certainly to a bank account and these types of things. The mobile phone is a very, very powerful tool that we have in our pockets. And what technology does, that is, I illustrate that with this slightly complicated slide. So this tells you the total lifetime channel cost per transaction by channel. So if you build a bank branch, right, there's a capital expenditure. We amortize that over the expected lifetime of the branch, and then we add in the variable cost. And the specific numbers don't show for some reason, but it doesn't matter. What matters is the number in red, right? The channel cost in this particular example can be crushed by 90%. That's the power of technology in this specific example. Now, the financial system policymakers and regulators have a real concern about the integrity of the financial system. And that has a lot to do with anti-money laundering concerns. But after September 11, it has a lot also to do with combating terrorism finance. And there is a global standard-setting body for this topic. It's called the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. They provide guidance, and they provide oversight, and they are dominated by law enforcement professionals. And there is a real risk as a country that if you violate or are viewed as by FATF as not being compliant with their guidance, then there's a real risk to be shut off from the international payment flows. And you really don't want that to happen to your country. And as a private sector player, there is a real risk that you get fined, in particular by authorities in this country, to the tunes of $8–9 billion for violating know your customer requirements. And that's why you might have heard about this. That's why a number of international remittances corridors are being shut down. You cannot send money to Somalia anymore. So these are real issues. And this notion of how can we create a different environment that satisfies the regulatory concerns, but makes sure that we actually reach all these excluded people. That is the power of identity, electronic or digital identity, as applied to this world. So India, Ajay, you spoke about that, you teed it up. So India has obviously the identity effort, that's Aadhaar. And that's at the bottom of the stack. So stack is a little bit technology speak, if you forgive me. So there's an identity layer, which is the unique digital ID. On top of that, India is now building a paperless layer, and that is the eKYC that you also mentioned. So that's sanctioned by the Reserve Bank of India as the regulator. On top of that is a payments layer, so all these various people can communicate easily with each other. The payment system in India will be more modern than that of the US. We are terrible here, right? We still write checks, and it takes 3 days to clear. You can go to real-time environment very, very soon. And on top of that is then a transaction layer. That's the use cases. That's the text now. GST is the text, RJ, I believe. And even India is building in this consent layer around privacy. So you see how the identity is at the very foundation, and that's why it's called Aadhaar, which is foundation in India. It's the foundation for a broader technology stack, if you will, that is going to catapult India to the forefront of the digital economy. And just to illustrate again with numbers, so this is data from an online investment provider in India. And this is the acquisition cost. So for many businesses, there's a big cost in acquiring a customer upfront, signing you up, finding you, Jennifer, verifying you are you, signing you up. There's a big cost. And then you earn small revenues over many, many years. And so this notion of lifetime value of a customer is very much driven by the acquisition cost. So being able to crush the acquisition cost by three-fourths makes this type of offering far more viable to far more people. So from a user's perspective, here are a couple of the features that, from my perspective, would be ideal for this identity as a foundation towards a bigger picture. The first one is, ideally, it captures everyone, because I want to serve everyone. Ideally, it's foundational and it has some degree of cost efficiency built in. I actually think it should be needs-driven. Not everything, and Edgar teed that up with the level of assurance that are coming out of the UK. And the example that his colleague used in an earlier event, which struck me, is KYC requirements for bank account are pretty high because of these terrorism concerns. But if you, as a young adult, want to show that you are 18 and you are allowed to go in the bar, there's a far lower threshold level of what really needs to be authenticated. And so why can't we do this in such a way that on the foundational layer, there's actually a needs-driven approach and a proportionate approach to that. And as a user, I obviously want this to be legitimate and regulated. I don't want a Supreme Court shutting down a foundational system on which I just build a business aimed at the base of the pyramid. So these are user perspectives that I'm not entirely, so don't quote me on these. This is sort of thinking in formation, and as I said, as I thought about it this morning, I would probably edit it a bit. I will offer 3 propositions in a second. And that might be, yeah, I'm almost done. I do first one thing, which is I show you that none of what we are talking about is sort of pipe dreams in the future. So these new services, electronically enabled, that reach far more people at far lower cost, are happening today as we speak. So this is a picture largely drawing on innovation in East Africa. East Africa is the country that has innovated the mobile money as a revolution first. You probably have heard of M-Pesa in Kenya, which is everybody in Kenya now uses it. It's the ability to send money via the phone. M-Pesa has become, in Swahili, a verb, as much as we use Google, right? So I M-Pesa'd you 10 shillings. And what that does, this notion of a low-cost, ubiquitous digital payment system, allows for totally new business models that reach more people at lower cost. I'll give you 2 examples. In the credit space, if you are in the informal economy, excluded as I described earlier, you also don't have a FICO score or some such thing. FICO, for those of you not in the US, that's your credit score based on which you get a mortgage or not. So you don't have any of that. But what you do have is your mobile phone and your phone record and your payment record. And I know Jennifer, by looking at your phone data, I know she gets a number of unique incoming calls, which means Jennifer has a large social network, which is an indicator of creditworthiness, because your friends would come to your help. Whereas this Tillman guy, nobody ever calls him, has no friends, don't give him credit. So there is stuff happening that is very, very powerful. Same with, and this is not just in financial services, it goes into the health space, transportation, energy, residential solar power. So you can get a kit, a solar kit to power your house, costs about $100. For a poor family, for a poor family, that's unaffordable to pay in one go. But pay as you go every day via electronic payments is very easily doable. So if you permit me, I do my 3 propositions.
Can you do it in a minute?
I can, yeah. And you know, I had an eye on the time. I'm not really over.
We were close. This is very good.
Okay, so it seems to me that, certainly from our vantage point, the real value in what we are talking about and what I try to lay out to you is actually this notion of authenticating people and allow them to participate in the modern online 21st century economy. And for half of the world, it means bringing them into this new world for the first time. And for the other half, which is us, it means taking advantage of the great benefits of innovation, a la Airbnb and Uber and all these type of things. That's my first proposition. It's really around the authentication online. So Iceland, which I loved as an example, at some level is not relevant because that's identity but not used for authentication online. My second proposition is technology is there to pretty much do what we want. Therefore, we have choices. And I think as a global citizen, the frontier and the choices that we have is figuring out 2 things. One is this required level of assurance that Edgar spoke about, right? So what's the information that really needs to travel so I can do or I can claim the benefit, or I can do what I want to do? It's different for bank accounts versus entering the bar and proving that I'm 18. And then the second is flipping this entire paradigm of I should allow this information to be pulled. It's my data, my information. I allow it to be pulled by somebody who provides me a service in return, as opposed to it's automatically being pulled by somebody in the background. Or even worse, it's owned by entities that are even more outside of our control than governments might be. Because the reality is, if we don't provide this as a public good, some big private sector companies, and most of us use their services, might assemble some resemblance of an online identity. And I'm not sure we want that. So I end on that. Thank you.
You end on a great sentence, which I know will prompt a lot of questions. John, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, I'm John. Good to meet you all. It is good to be with you here. I am here today because of the federal government of the United States. And I say that in the sense of their inability to pass any kind of coherent, realistic immigration policy in our nation because they prefer a politics that relies on fear, ignorance, and prejudices. So I'm here courtesy of them. I should also tell you the problem I am trying to solve, which may not be the problem you're trying to solve, but is your problem then, not mine, which is I care about much more basic things, which is getting most people on most days to get along with one another, to be good neighbors to one another, and to see their interest in supporting one another. I have much smaller goals. We came to an issue of an identification system for a very different reason. The immigration policies of the United States resulted in the fact that 20% of our population were immigrants. Fine, not a problem. It's always been a characteristic of our community. But what the problem was, half of them were undocumented. So we had classes of individuals in our community. What's the problem with that? Is oftentimes they wouldn't deal with police. A woman was beat up by her boyfriend. The boyfriend would say, I'm going to go to ICE if you complain about this. They don't talk to the New Haven police because they don't distinguish between the New Haven police and ICE from where they came from. It's because of what it was explained to me in 2004 what an ATM is. What's an ATM, Jen?
It's a machine you put
No. Wrong answer. An ATM in 2004 in New Haven was someone with Mexican features who was walking down the streets, therefore undocumented, probably didn't have a bank account, therefore could be a victim of a street robbery with no concern about going to the police and complaining about it. That's what an ATM was in our community. Thank you again, United States of America. In coming to this idea of a resident card, we were not trying to make a political statement. We were not trying to be a sanctuary city, as Bill O'Reilly calls us. We were just trying to get along with one another in this adverse community. Public policy in New Haven in 2004 started the way it did with a lot of things with me, which was a bunch of residents coming into my office and hitting me on the side of the head. What they started talking about was the context of these public safety issues but also connecting immigrants with city government better, dealing with wage theft, underreporting of crime, some pretty basic things that, frankly, I was getting paid to deal with. Two community groups came in with us basically 7 issues. How to open bank accounts, how to interact with the New Haven Police Department without fear of getting reported to federal authorities, enforcement of wage laws, just generally policing issues, documents not being available anything other than English, and a resident card, an ID card, so they could say who the heck they were. We've been living here for 10 years. We can't identify ourselves. City stepped into this beginning in 2005, but like I've learned in politics or swimming, it's not always good to jump in the deep end of the pool if you don't know how to swim. So we start where? The shallow end of the pool. The shallow end of the pool for us was converting documents to Spanish. Made sense, it was easy, no one got really upset. Then we issued a general order, one of the first in the United States, to say Unless you are the suspect in a felony, we don't really care at the New Haven Police Department what your immigration status is. We're not an occupying army in our community. We're peace officers trying to get us to go along. We want what? Trust. You can't trust someone if you think they're going to report them and get them deported, despite what the federal government thinks. So we began working on that and issued that. In 2007, we started approaching the idea of a resident ID card in our community. Simple thing you would think it to be. But we started someplace first, actually, because we knew a lot of people were going to be upset about this because we were doing something for one class of individuals and not another. And of course, they had all broken the law and were here and were doing terrible things like apparently Syrian refugees are now, according to some. So what we started with was this idea of rights and responsibilities. Our residents have rights, but they also have responsibilities. What we started doing was saying to our undocumented community is, time to pay taxes. You know, the IRS is a wonderful organization. They don't really care where you come from as long as you do one thing, pay them. They really don't. They'll give you a tax ID number, right? They don't care. And so basically what we started doing first was signing undocumenteds up to pay their taxes. We'd point out to undocumenteds, look, someday there's probably going to be amnesty. You get it to the front of the line if you've paid your taxes. By the way, I'm paying my taxes. You ought to pay your taxes, right? You know, it's a fair and equitable thing. So we started doing that. IRS was glad to take the money. In May of 2007, now we're going to issue an ID card, right? So the first thing you do as a politician is you try to take off all the stupid issues people are, well, not stupid, all the issues people will use to try to distract you from the issue on the table. So we weren't going to pay with this from taxpayer dollars. We got a local foundation to put up the money to pay for the ID program. Therefore, I didn't have to hear is, why should my taxpayer dollars be used to give these people, you know, benefits so that they can, I don't know, go and get work or something awful like that. So we didn't do it with taxpayer dollars. The second thing we made is we didn't make it an ID card. We decided to make it a city resident card. Benefits for everybody, right? You'll be able to go to the library. You'll be able to access recreation services. I started telling, I don't know, in Connecticut's a very wealthy state, not necessarily our community so much, but there's this town called Greenwich. It's one of the richest places in the United States. I said, look, all we're doing is the Greenwich Beach card. Greenwich has a card. If you live in Greenwich and you want to go to the beach, they give you a little card. You're a resident. I said, we're just doing the Greenwich Beach cards, but just in New Haven with undocumented residents. The other thing we did was we did our due diligence. We went to the Connecticut Attorney General, went to the Connecticut Bankers Association. We went to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Very interesting meeting with the U.S. Attorney. We started to go. We started organizing the community a lot around this. It was a big thing. Getting the community, initially mostly the immigrant and undocumented community, of course, the newer immigrants, not the older immigrants, who had the biases of the older residents that they had for the newer immigrants. For the longer-term immigrants, the longer-term immigrants had, of course, biases for the newer immigrants. So what we started doing was organizing a lot around this stuff. So anyways, in June of 2007, our legislative body, although they didn't have to appropriate any money, guys, this isn't going to cost you anything, this won't hurt. It's like the dentist, we're going to give you Novocaine, we're going to get someone else to pay for it. They vote to accept the grant money to do this, and the next day, the city of New Haven gets its first ICE raids ever, 36 hours later. Actually, the most humorous thing, not for the people who were arrested and taken to be held in places somewhere in New England where no one would tell us where they were, was I spoke to Secretary Chertoff of Homeland Security the day after the raids, and he said, you know, John, you have an outsized opinion of the federal government if you can think we can respond to anything in 24 hours. But frankly, what they had done is in the months before we did the card, they had started planning the retaliatory action against the city, and it was pretty apparent in their FOI documents. Anyways, it did a bunch of raids across. I knew we were in trouble. 8:15, I was in the mayor's office, and I started getting calls about raids in the city. Usually when there are raids in the city, like the police chief would have told me we're doing raids. So when I called the police chief, I said, Chief, we're doing raids. He said, what raids? And at which point I knew it was really a problem. So they came in to execute 20 warrants. They arrested 32 people, only serving 4 of the warrants. The people who were arrested were brown, undocumented, and happened to be in the wrong place in the wrong times. They did us a huge favor, not for those 32 people arrested. They did us a huge favor. They absolutely galvanized the community. And something that's very important that this card is really about, which is stickiness, social cohesion, people's self-interest in one another. They did us a huge favor. The congressional delegation, our 2 United States senators, and congressperson who are like, John, yeah, that ID card, good idea, I'll see you later. Really weren't out leaders on this, but once we got attacked by the federal government, they all sort of came around. They're great people. Anyways, we finally launched the card in July of 2007. People started lining up at 4 o'clock in the morning. They went from the front of the city hall, down the street, around the corner, down the street. These were people who just wanted to say they belong to a community. I want to emphasize this point. Immigration for our city is very much about economic growth, economic mobility, and about social mobility. It always has been that way for New Haven. My largest employer is actually the finest Ivy League school in the United States. And has over 4,000 individuals from 100 countries teaching and studying research. Smart communities don't put up walls, they tear down walls. The fact is, the wealth of cities and communities are not ballparks and convention centers. They're very much social capital. This is fabric of connection to one another, interrelationships, self-interest in one another. It's aggregations of trust and norms that make us act on behalf of one another and see our self-interest, in other words. For those of you that follow stuff in the United States, and for those of us who are from here, if you want to understand why Ferguson blew up after Michael Brown was shot and killed, it was because it was a community that did not have connections. The people who lived there were not connected to the institutions of governance. There were not relationships of trust that could stand the pressure and begin to engage folks when something bad, and like in all our lives, right, something bad always happens. It's always like, whenever you think things are bad, they're going to get worse, right? So, things go bad. So fact is, the strength of cities and communities, and I would actually ask civil society, is in this sense of connection to one another. And that's really what the card did for us more than anything else. It helped us define the self-interest in one another. I'll say one last thing, and then I'll go. And I'll say it gratuitously, and I really don't care because I'm never running for office again. There was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal yesterday by this guy by the name of Daniel Hellinger, who was conflating the intellectual anarchy that is now occurring on America's campuses, referring specifically to Yale, if any of you have followed that, to the anarchy of the Middle East. And I had to, after reading the headline, I had to see what it is, what it was he was saying. He was saying that, but it's, what's happening at some of the campuses, particularly places like Yale, is that this idea of social capital and connection and interest in one another is actually being strengthened and at work. Anyone who is representing that this is about Halloween costumes is pimping their issue on the fact of this promoting of social capital, which is a huge and powerful thing. And I'll tell you one other thing. It's these very concepts of social capital that are at the heart of the Syrian refugee issue. New Haven, Connecticut, on Wednesday took the Syrian refugees that the governor of Indiana refused to take on Monday. And it's because we're not afraid of the future. We have confidence in one another, and we're looking forward to building a future with one another. Good seeing you all. Hope that works for you.
Thank you, John, very much. Nisha, please. You're hitting wrap up. Okay.
So I think it's really unfair that I have to go after that. That was wonderful.
I heard your song.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm here with the New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and for those of you who don't know what our office is, affectionately referred to as MOIA, we are essentially a bridge between New York City Hall and New York City's many diverse immigrant communities. Just to give you a sense of scale, in New York, 37% of our population are foreign-born. If you add the kids, it's 60% of New York City. We have more immigrants in New York than there are people in Chicago. So it is very much kind of part of the, the bloodstream of New York is immigrants and immigrant inclusion. And what I'm going to talk about today is specifically a program we launched this past January called IDNYC, and really inspired by the work in New Haven first and foremost, and then cities that have done that work since then, really creating a citywide ID card for all New Yorkers. And I'm also brought here by the federal government in that, unfortunately, immigration reform remains stuck in Washington. And what that means for families in New York is, for one thing, they can't get government ID, and that's true also at the state level. Unfortunately, New York is not one of the states that offers driver's licenses to all. So for immigrant parents, particularly the undocumented, can't always get into schools to pick up their kids and participate in PTA meetings. When somebody stopped because they were biking on the wrong sidewalk, if you're an undocumented immigrant, you don't have an ID to show, you can get arrested, and then that can potentially lead to bad consequences in terms of deportation. But also, New York City, frankly, is a city where lots of people don't drive. About half of our adult population does not have a New York State driver's license. And so identification is just something that is a real priority within New York City, and became one of the top items in Mayor de Blasio's platform when he took office 2 years ago, because from his perspective and the perspective of the administration, it's better for people to have an ID if they don't have it, and be able to access city services, get into buildings, be able to just interact more freely than if they don't have ID. And, when we launched our program, we did not face some of the same sort of backlash from the federal government. We have actually had a very positive response to the card, but I do want to underscore just the sort of innovativeness of what New Haven did when they did it, and the kind of road that it's paved for cities like New York several years later. So here is a visual of our ID card. And I wanted to point out, just sort of based on the conversations from earlier, some of the components of it that were developed. One, we brought together stakeholders from across the board, immigrant communities, LGBT groups, a range of different groups that had an interest in developing this ID card, and got a lot of feedback on sort of just the design of the card and the importance of the design. Folks wanted the card to look official. So it really needed to look similar to driver's licenses. It should look like a government ID card. That was important to people to feel like it truly was that government-issued identification that will get them into buildings and can be used. You'll notice there we have gender marker. We made gender, in identifying your gender optional, and I think this was really important, particularly for the transgender community, so you can male, female, or it can be blank. On the back, you can list emergency contact, something that parents groups really wanted if their children, 14 and older, had the ID card. You can list your language preference, something really important in a city where half of the households speak a language other than English at home, and a quarter of the population is limited English proficient. And a range of other sort of features built into the card. You can't see them here, but security features very similar to straight driver's licenses, right? Holograms, kind of squiggly writing, things that I'm no expert on in terms of the technology, but that are very important in ensuring that this card is secure. An important stakeholder we worked with in developing the ID card was the NYPD. And the reason for that is because we really wanted to be sure that the NYPD would accept this card like other city agencies when it was presented to them in the field. And so these security questions that came up were really informed by the NYPD intelligence unit, and some of the fraud protections are not particularly technologically intensive or scientific. It's things like making sure you mail the card. After an individual's applied, the card is mailed to them to essentially confirm residence. Residence being very important to the NYPD in the application of the card. So those were the sorts of features that we built in by engaging the range of stakeholders that we have. How do you apply for the card? So the card is free, and you can go to one of 24 community-based enrollment sites around the city. We very deliberately put them in places like libraries and community organizations in the neighborhoods where predominantly immigrant families live, but really across the board. We also have rotating pop-up enrollment centers where people can go where there isn't a permanent site, but we'll locate a temporary site there. And you essentially have to bring in documents that establish your identity. So it could be a foreign passport, can even be expired within the last 3 years, and something to prove your residency, like a utility bill. And we have staff that are trained on the front line who can sort of look at the documents and ensure that they're authentic based on what the frontline staff can see. And then we have a back-end staff to also review the authenticity of the documents. And we worked with a range, consulates, social service agencies, kind of the panoply of agencies to develop a long list of documents that New Yorkers could use to try to ensure that as many people who needed this ID were able to get it. And, I think one of the things that we've done is when we launched the card, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time to tell you about the different benefits we added to the card. So there's the obvious benefit of having an identification card, but on top of that, we added a range of other features to make the card appealing to all New Yorkers. So that when we sort of went out the door with an ID program where we said it's 8 million New Yorkers, one card for all of us, we actually had people other than the undocumented signing up for the card. And the goal here was to really destigmatize the program, to make sure it's not just a list of the undocumented, but also importantly to create that symbolic value, which John spoke about, which has been incredibly important with this ID card too. People love being New Yorkers. They're proud of being from New York City. And we wanted to create an ID card that really sort of symbolized that and created that sense of social cohesion and coherence. And so a range of different benefits were added to the card. One that we've worked on is financial inclusion, which we've already talked about here. Now, some other cities' ID cards had built-in prepaid debit features to their ID card. In New York, we decided not to do that. And the reason mainly is that from our research, the products that were out there added fees to the consumer that we did not want to have to impose on New York City residents. So instead, we worked with financial institutions in the city to just ensure that the ID card could be used as primary ID for opening bank accounts. And we have about 12 financial partners, mostly credit unions and community banks. And what we've also done is partnered with the New York State Bankers Association to actually approach the federal regulators to get guidance on whether our ID card could be used for the larger banks. The Know Your Customer rules and some of these other regulatory concerns are very real concerns for the larger financial institutions in particular. And so we've been doing advocacy as a city to really assuage some of those concerns and actually have gotten very good guidance from the federal government about the Know Your Customer rules as they pertain to ID NYC. Unfortunately, the big banks are still moving very slowly in sort of signing on to the program, but that's something that we're continuing to do. And I think financial inclusion is an important part of what people are looking to this ID card for. Other benefits. We worked with our Department of Cultural Affairs to secure a benefit where ID card holders can get 1 year of free membership at 33 of the city's top cultural institutions. So this is places like the Met, Lincoln Center, the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. And what's been really interesting about this is that we've had more than 70,000 of these memberships that have come as a result of this ID card. And so many of them are from families that have not actually accessed these institutions before. Because the perception was that they were very elite institutions. They were excluding people, not deliberately, but really just in the sense of seeming out of reach for many of the families who were signing up for this ID card. And we've really been delighted to see that response. It's also meant that parents and lots of other folks who are not undocumented immigrants have signed up for the ID card. The card doubles as a library card, and we're thinking about other ways to do the kind of integration that can make it so that this ID card is sort of the one ID that you need in your pocket to really access different programs and benefits. And then finally, we sort of linked the card to this citywide prescription drug discount program that we have. So it's really a myriad different benefits that have resulted in, have been integrated into the card and continuing to think of new ones. And one new one to flag for everyone is around healthcare access. So in New York, especially in the wake of the Affordable Care Act, our uninsurance numbers have gone down dramatically, but not for the undocumented. More than 60% of the uninsured in New York City are the undocumented based on our city estimates. And so what we're doing, sort of modeled on programs that LA and San Francisco have, is creating a access to care program. It's not insurance, but a sort of health home and coordinated care program for the undocumented. We're piloting it this year, and if it goes well, hopefully we can scale it beyond that. But the ID NYC will be the enrollment card for this program. So it's just another example of sort of how to use the ID card to enable access to services. We have been astounded and delighted by the response to this ID card program. We have nearly 630,000 people who've signed up for the card in less than a year. In some neighborhoods like Corona and Queens, which is a very immigrant-rich neighborhood, 1 out of 5 residents has the ID card already. So this response has far exceeded expectations that we had. As in New Haven, when the card launched, in fact, even before the mayor was done announcing the card's launch, we had lines around the block at the library where we were doing the launch, and that was true at the 25 sites around the city. So we actually expanded our capacity significantly. Following the launch of our card, we've also seen, municipal ID cards are now becoming a go-to sort of policy solution for a lot of cities that are grappling with the same challenges. And so we've had 24 cities from around the country approach us about replicating this model, and we brought them to New York to learn from one another and from New Haven, San Francisco, and other cities that have done these programs. And very happy to think about other ways that we might be able to integrate and use this ID card as a way of better connecting New York residents to their government. We don't ask for immigration status, we don't collect that immigration status, but we do know that a huge percentage of our cardholders are immigrant families who have not always interacted with government with this kind of sort of enthusiasm before, and so we really want to think about ways in which to build that bridge between government and the city, the people that it serves. Thank you.
You. Actually, Nisha, you didn't suffer from following John. You spoke with equal vigor and came in on time. So that's fabulous. Listen, we have about 20 minutes, right? Because this is over at 3:30. So let's open this up for questions. I just wanted to plant. I will not ask you to interact, although in the course of this, if you raise your hand and want a question, one of the other, please do, so you can be part of the mix. But so Mariana is talking about how at the sort of global scale, there's a recognition that development is linked to identity and identification, just flat out. And you have Till giving us the basic principles of how these cards work in various applications, particularly in financial services, where they have to be inclusive, they have to be legitimate with the political powers behind them, and that they have to be needs-driven. With John, there is remarkable narrative of the politics of identity, knowing your city, and the power of social cohesion that is supported by this capacity to have a residence card. Again, it speaks to the demand, needs-driven, as Till was speaking about, and these themes are echoed in what Nisha's talking about, and it's interesting about the fact that John going first and New York City going second. I mean, that's not the usual, well, I shouldn't say that. But in any case, it's interesting how this is actually played in a positive way. And again, is talking about, and her talk reveals a deep knowledge of the city and how the uses and the design and the rollout require your understanding the community you're serving. So this is a rich array of presentations. Please raise your hand. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. And please say who you are and who you're addressing the question to.
Joseph Attic, ID for Africa, and I'm actually addressing the question to Nisha. The card platform, the identity platform that you guys put together in New York would be very relevant for the development sort of environment, because in a way you're approaching it from the concept of we're not going to charge you for this, this is free. So we're looking for many programs where a respectable card looks official and has the security trust can be given. I was just wondering, what has your experience been with the cost per card? If you are willing to share that with us, because that becomes a factor in scaling that capability.
Yeah, so I don't have the cost per card and sort of some of that information sort of off the top of my head, but I can get that for you. Our budget, and this is something that makes it a little bit harder to scale when we talk to other cities, right? our budget for this in this current fiscal year is, I think, around $20 million, right? Now, a lot of that is around staffing and the initial startup of actually buying the technology and sort of building that capacity. I don't think the ongoing costs past this first year will be that high, and our initial demand has now started to move to a steady state.
And
So,
this is paid for by the taxpayer? Or
and
is
it is paid through city dollars, yes,
dollars.
exactly. And so it's a city-funded program that will, over time, I think, you'll start to see sort of more of the reality of what the cost per card is when you take out some of those initial.
It will be really relevant because if you're able to break into the sub-dollar per card price point, I mean, my suspicion from your program is that you are talking about $3 to $5 card, which case it will be very difficult for us to use in Africa and other places because it's too high. The other, just quick question. This is not accepted federally. For example, if I want to board a plane, I cannot board a plane with it, right?
You should not be able to board a plane with it. That said, anecdotally, I've heard people have boarded a plane.
Okay.
It looks real official, doesn't it? Yeah. John, would you like to comment on that question? Do you have a sense of price per card, or do you have a sense of how much it's saving the city? Is there an evaluation?
It was much higher than $3 a card. I mean, it was like $15, $20 a card.
When did you do it?
It was, what year did we do it? 2007 we started doing it, but I mean, frankly, we were so backed into a corner by the federal agencies about many of the same security features Nisha described, that frankly, we didn't want to have that fight. So we were like, just let's do it and we'll spend the money on it. Actually, our card is less relevant now because 2 years ago, the state of Connecticut extended Connecticut driver's licenses to undocumented residents. You know, we were happy because, like, I literally had City Hall staffers get death threats over this. I mean, people were just stupid and unsafe. And, you know, the Connecticut General Assembly just went ahead and did it. You know, I mean, so what's the benefit? What the benefit is...
I meant the in a narrow sense.
The dollar and cents benefit is it reduced chaos in the city. I'm all for reducing chaos.
Yep. Chaos is expensive, too. Thank you. That's great. So, Jackie, I saw your hand up, and then the man behind you.
Thank you very much for these presentations. I wanted to ask the last two speakers, how you see the relevance of this experience of working with a stigmatized population, undocumented migrants, how you see the relevance for what we're facing now and what the application of your experience might be. John, you said, well, I wasn't thinking of anything like a sister city, but actually, what's wrong with a sister city? I think we should be having sister or sanctuary cities now all over America. I think we should be having a movement that kind of counterposes to the 25 or 26 governors another vision of how you address the refugee issues. So I'm just wondering, obviously, refugee issue is a federal issue, not a city or a state issue. But I'm just wondering what your thoughts are and how this, really kind of inclusive precedent that you've set could be used for the exclusion issues that we're now facing.
You know, when I said not wanted to be sanctuary city, I mean, literally, there was this thought that we were trying to make a broad political statement by doing this, and it truly wasn't that. It was just we wanted our residents to be able to identify themselves to our police and so forth. It later became that because, frankly, we became a sanctuary city in a real sense, and that Chertoff committed to suspend any ICE raids right after we haven't had an ICE raid since 2007. I mean, DHS created the sanctuary city. I think the larger issue, though, is I disagree with the idea that we've turned ourselves into a refugee destination, in point of fact, because State Department, who works right with these agencies that place folks, recognizes it's a hospitable community and extends in terms of landlords who are able to now provide housing, employers who are able to work with these folks who come over, and frankly our public schools, which is a department of city government that does it. So, I mean, I think it's a great model of saying when you have a dysfunctional level of government, our friends in Washington, of being able to drive policy from the ground up, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I think, right now you look at the refugee debate, and if you take out the toxic rhetoric that's happening, it's posing inclusion against security. And that seems like a very false dichotomy, right? When you look at a program like the ID cards, in that, from our perspective, by creating an inclusive city, you're actually promoting a sense of inclusion so that there's the cohesion that will not lead to kind of some of the fragmentation that happens with society. So it's really, I think, an example at the broader level of what inclusion can mean to sort of undermine some of these arguments that including more people threatens security. Also, on a very nuts and bolts level, going back to this issue of cost, the NYPD likes the ID card because that means less arrests for them, right? And we haven't quantified that yet, but we will, once the program's a little bit further along. And so there's ways in which you can put dollars and cents to these questions of how these programs of inclusion, even if it costs $20 million, could actually end up saving the city lots of money in the long term and promote public safety.
Great, thank you. So, sir, you, and then let me see how many other hands there are. 1, 2, okay. I'm sorry, way in the back. So we may need to double up a bit, but yes, your turn.
Yes, Ian Watson from Iceland again. I have a question both about the New York and New Haven programs. What happens when people move? Do they get a new card? Are they encouraged, or do they have an incentive to get a new card?
So in our case, our card is...
Could I just stop for a second?
Sure.
Think about that. Okay. Who else is asking a question about the New York experience? Yes, sir. Will you ask your question? No, I'm sorry, Mahathir, he was first. I saw him first even. So will you ask your question as well? And so then we'll have two sets of questions. What about change of residence and?
So it's more a comment than
Sir,
a question.
could you identify?
Sorry, Edgar Whitley from LSE. It's more a comment than a question.
That's good.
Interestingly, the US is a driver license. The UK is a driving license. It's a license proof that you are entitled to drive. And actually what that's getting at is that the city cards are more about attributes than identity. It's about being a resident of the city than anything else. And that becomes a really useful distinction that then ties in with Tillman's point and Mariana's point about the things that you can do if you are just verifying attributes.
You got that, right? And to the two of you, so residence and attributes. I think it was addressed to the two of you. Go, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. So first, to answer the question about what happens when people move, there is an obligation to report your change of address, and so we're hoping people will do that. Our cards are valid for 5 years, and then you have to renew. So we haven't really faced that challenge yet. And sadly, you can't use it outside of New York City. And then I like this idea. I mean, I think we've thought about our ID card from the beginning as being an instrument towards other ends, though you don't want to underestimate the sort of symbolic value of the card as sort of, when we launched the card, there was a woman who spoke, and she said, "Now I feel like I exist." It's sort of sad that, that this ID card would do that, but I think that's an element of this as well.
Mm-hmm. John, you want to comment?
Just the only one thing. We used to, so our residents used to go in the area towns, get pulled over by police a lot. And one of the area towns used to take our resident ID card and punch it with a hole puncher to disface it and disfigure it because they understood what it was and they didn't want to recognize it. Interestingly, I think what's happened over time is that doesn't happen anymore, is because the idea that these folks are a threat, they're not contributing members of the community, it sort of gives lie to that issue. And so that neighboring town doesn't do that anymore. We've sort of gotten past that. And while I'd like to say New Haven was brave about doing this, we had a political constituency. Look, it's like if you're going to do it in Cambridge first. You know what I mean? Not, not Biloxi or something, right?
Okay, so way in the back, and then two of you. I see you both have questions. Yep.
This is Pam Dixon, World Privacy Forum. I have a question for the two MuniCard presenters. Thank you all for your presentations. So in regards to those cards, one of the questions I have is, because data protection legislation is so important around the use and voluntariness of the cards, are there privacy policies that connect with the cards, or how did you go about the legislative process, and what exists for that? Thank you.
Privacy, not surprising, was a hot topic during the legislative process and after it. So our law was very carefully drafted to say that data associated with the ID cards would be protected to the maximum extent allowed by the law. And then on top of that, another piece of the law was also to say that if law enforcement wanted the ID card, because that was a real concern in the city, that they would actually require a judicial warrant to be able to access the data for individuals. And then the host agency, so the program sits within our social services agency, and the commissioner of that agency actually issued 4 different executive orders on use of data, transmission of data, the kind of full array of privacy protections that are needed, and we made sure to publicize that widely, and that was based both on stakeholder feedback and our own desire not to have the information about people get spread to places it shouldn't be spread.
We were just very conscious. Our privacy laws are delineated by the Connecticut General Statutes, not by us. So we knew we were going to get a challenge, that someone was going to FOI the records. We anticipated that was going to happen, so we sort of gamed out with our lawyers what our response would be and what we thought the outcomes would be, structured the information. I mean, but it's such BS. I mean, the day we started issuing the cards, we had these folks with American flags in front of City Hall filming all the people going into City Hall. It was an intimidation strategy in order to back them off. And really, these folks were just, so inspired. I mean, just so powerful about saying, we're here, we're part of this community. And I mean, again, I just think a good example of grassroots organizing and, and changing people's attitudes.
Just a quick
No,
follow-up. How
I'm
long-
sorry. We're going to be short of time. I'm sorry. Please, after the break, you can certainly do that. Yes.
Hi, Justin Hughes. I'm with PA Consulting. I was previously with a company called Delarue, and we used to make the New York driver's license. So I know about the cost side of things. But one of the things we saw in driver's licenses and identity documents was that security features were increasing, getting more and more complex. And that was in part driven by the banks, because the banks wanted to see, they used that as their primary identification form, so they wanted to see the driver's license authorities issuing better and better documents. What the banks have started doing in some areas is actually not using identity documents to verify identity, but using sort of credit references and
So your
case
question-
management rather than identity management. So my question is, do you see that identity should remain the sort of the preserve of national or institutions, governments, states, World Bank, etc., and accountable bodies rather than private sector companies? Which I'm aware is a massive question, but
It is a
if
massive
there's
question,
a
actually.
one-word
and,
answer.
and maybe, Till, would you take a first hand at that, and Mariana, before we move it? I mean, you may not want to comment if the two do a good job right off.
Well, I try, and then there are folks in the audience who know probably better, but I think there is this important distinction between, which I try to draw between identification and authentication at the level, information level that's required for the purpose of the authentication. And those two things are quite different. And if you do the latter, you build in the first line of defense from a privacy perspective, federated data architecture, so it can't just all be easily combined, so to create profiles of us that know more than we know about ourselves. It seems to me that the core identity, this very thin layer that I described in the India stack, that is the quintessential public good and the prerogative of the public sector. And then a lot can be built on that with the right protections.
And Mariana,
I would agree with that.
does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So yes, did you have a question, or you were just raising your hand for him? Okay, so way in the back, please.
Thank you so much. I'm Layla Magari. I work with the Gender, Women, and Democracy team at the National Democratic Institute. My question is for Mariana. I know you've done a lot of work on gender and national IDs, and you mentioned the World Bank's ID for Development initiative. And I was just wondering if gender is going to be integrated into the assessment phase of the planning, and if so, what that looks like. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And indeed, we understood that gender is an important component of our action in the countries, and the countries have highlighted to us the need to consider the fact that many of the women and girls remain uncounted. They are the ones who most of the time lack electoral participation because they don't have an ID. So in the assessment tool that we have developed at the World Bank involving all the sectors and specifically a gender group, we looked at these dimensions and we continue refining this tool so that we make sure that we get the gender disaggregated data in terms of birth registration and access to ID documents, etc. We have another group at the World Bank that deals with women, business, and law. So they really look at access of women to opening, bank accounts and companies for themselves, and that touches tangentially on the access to identification, because this is needed when you want to open open a business. So we indeed look more closely now at the gender aspects, and happy to take on board any of your suggestions if you have to move that forward.
Great.
My
Jill, a comment.
suspicion is that, and I will, RJ, maybe you can confirm that. My suspicion is that these newer approaches are doing relatively better on the gender dimension. Maybe not fully closing the gap, but they're doing relatively better. When you compare ARDA with some of the other numbers you had for India, would that be the case?
Oh, excuse me, one sec. Sir, but let's have the microphone.
Our experience, in fact, it's a very good question. Let's say we have some various functional IDs, for example, passport, or even income tax identification card, which we call PAN card. And if you see gender distribution, you will find, much more a different scenario where, you find one gender, outnumbering the other gender by a huge margin. Whereas in case of Aadhaar, it is almost, it is in the same ratio as it is in the population.
Fascinating. I'm
And
compelled.
this is a spread over all ages. It's not that in a particular age group, this is the balance. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Well, thank you all for your attention and for your great questions. And above all, can we thank the panelists again for fascinating presentations.